Hello. Welcome back to the Space Gulag. Today we are doing What If the Bad Batch Executed Order 66. Before we begin, special thanks to all of our patrons, voice actors, and everyone else part of my team. Want a chance to get some limited time merch? Go down below. There is Pride of the Empire and the Broken One. Otherwise, our story begins in the snow of Kalar. The Republic had just won a small insignificant skirmish in their battle against the Separatists. Jedi Padawan Caleb Dume was able to retrieve reinforcements in the form of Experimental Unit 99. This squad of clones called themselves the Bad Batch. With the battle looking favorably towards the Republic, the Jedi General permitted her student to run with the Bad Batch in their assault on the front lines. Though shortly after Caleb and the members of the Bad Batch began running forward, Caleb turned around. He felt a disturbance in the Force, and then he heard the sound of blaster fire. The Bad Batch turned around too. They all watched as clone troopers began to surround Jedi Master Depa Billaba. Caleb began running towards his master as she cried out for him to run. Hunter looked at Tech, who relayed to him that the message was coming in from across all clone frequencies. Execute Order 66. Wrecker lowered his helmet as he stepped forward and raised his blaster. As Caleb heard the cries of his master, he turned around with his lightsaber still ignited. Yet, he didn't have enough time to react before he was filled with blaster bolts. Depa's last sight would be her student falling to the ground lifelessly. Hunter ordered Echo and Crosshair to make sure the traitors were executed, as he, Wrecker, and Tech walked over towards Captain Gray, who had just finished killing Depa Billaba. Hunter ordered Gray to progress the assault. The war would be over soon, but they needed to finish off the rest of the Seppies here before they could go any further. While the rest of the Battle of Kalar would be an overwhelming victory, the Bad Batch would depart from the front lines back to Kamino. It had been several rotations since they had last been at their home world, and they were fond of their return. With the end of the Jedi coming so quickly, it also seemed as if the war was nearly over. The regs at Depa City were belligerent as always, and so the Bad Batch reported to their bay and awaited further instructions. Throughout their time on Kamino, they would have the distinct privilege of seeing the Emperor address the Empire and do a training exercise for Tarkin himself. It wouldn't be long after that the Bad Batch would be dispatched to deal with an insurgent on the planet in the Mid-Rim. With their orders clear, the Bad Batch would depart and complete their mission with excellence. When they arrived on the jungle world, they were tasked with finding and killing the insurgent known as Saw Gerrera. Once they found him and his squad, they picked him off from the tree line, and without any hesitation, Hunter, Wrecker, and Echo would slide down into the camp and kill off all of the rebels. When they returned to Kamino, they were congratulated on their work. Tarkin had a deeper, darker plan for them. Being that they were clones, and that they were being phased out, Tarkin figured that he would use the members of Experimental Unit 99 for a new program of troopers for the Empire. Being that they showed no hesitation in killing Jedi Padawan Caleb Dume and executing the insurgent, who was loyal to the Republic and Saw Gerrera, Tarkin believed these troops would be a fine addition to the ranks of the Empire. With the Bad Batch return to Kamino, he would request that Chief Medical Officer Nala Se sedate the troopers and have them transported with Vice Admiral Rampart to Wayland. She asked why, to which Tarkin informed her that she would be briefed upon her arrival to Mount Tantus. The Bad Batch would have no knowledge of any of this. Sadly for Omega, she would see her brothers sedated, though Nala Se didn't want the same fate for her, so she made a point to tell Tarkin that Omega was just simply her assistant. Tarkin was under the assumption that the 5 members of Experimental Unit 99 were Echo, Tech, Wrecker, Crosshair, and Hunter. Though Echo was simply a reg, he was a late addition to the Bad Batch during the Clone Wars. Omega was one of 2 clones that were bred before the beginning of the war, with no accelerated growth. The Kaminoans decided since Jango Fett wanted an unaltered clone, they would make one for themselves. Jango got Alpha, otherwise known as Boba, and the Kaminoans kept Omega. She was really developing really well, but Nala Se was trying to keep her safe from the Empire. As the Kaminoans came to find out, they were doomed to fall into the traps of the Empire. The Prime Minister was executed, and after the Bad Batch, Omega and Nala Se were removed from the facilities at Depa City, and not long after the rest of the supplies from the city were removed, Vice Admiral Rampart sunk the city into the ocean. On the other side of the galaxy, the Bad Batch, Omega, and Nala Se would arrive at the Emperor's first super-private facility at Mount Tantus on Wayland. The facility was meant to host a new cloning program per the Emperor's request, and then on top of that it would be a top-secret storage facility. The Emperor had many plans in the works, and only a select few in the entire galaxy knew of these plans. Regardless, the scientists in the facility were employees of the Empire. Nala Se was there as an advisor with her little Omega by her side. The scientists explained everything to Nala Se, telling her that they were going to operate on Experimental Unit 99 for a number of weeks up to months, and then they would be deployed as a special unit, as per request of the Emperor. The testing was a terrible experience for Omega. Not that she had to undergo the training or the torture that they went through, but she had to watch her brothers suffer. For some of the experiments the squad underwent, they were sedated, though most of them they were awake, and for all of them they were extremely painful. The scientists were extracting the DNA of the highly elite squad so that they could mass produce them. There were several projects underway. Some of the clones that remained most loyal to the Empire were brought into Mount Tantus. One of these was Commander Neo. He was brought off the front lines of Imperial expansion and brought in for testing, though he wasn't a part of the same testing the Bad Batch was enduring. It was typically much more painful, and it consisted of him transforming. Commander Neo was ripped apart, flesh from bone, and replaced with a robotic exoskeleton. He was the first batch of clones offered up for the experimental project called the Dark Trooper program. The original idea the Empire was using was filling the interior with clone troopers and having extremely powerful robots on the outside. It was a combination of the B-2 Super Battle Droid and the elite trooper of the Republic. Other clones would be brought up to Mount Tantus, believing it was a simple guarding station, but it was far from. Echo was the luckiest member of the Bad Batch because most of his nervous system was already destroyed and he didn't feel pain. He was also very fortunate the Empire believed he was a part of Experimental Unit 99 rather than just a reg, because he would have become the baseline for the Dark Trooper program. After months of experimentation, the Bad Batch would be released from their torture. Omega would approach her brothers, but after their torture and the maximization of their inhibitor chips, they naturally blew her off and walked past her, without even the simplest of acknowledgement. It broke Omega's little heart, but she knew it wasn't their fault. While the Bad Batch had their new assignment, they were shipped off without the Marauder to the fleet stationed above Coruscant. On the other hand, one of the Imperial scientists realized that the DNA from Echo didn't match up with the DNA of the rest of the Bad Batch. So he gathered up a couple of the other Imperial hired scientists and informed them of his theory that Nala Se's little assistant was actually the fifth member of Experimental Unit 99. While the scientists didn't believe it was a big deal that Echo remained with the Bad Batch, he did believe it would be better serving of the Empire if they experimented on Omega in case she was that fifth member, especially since the clones they were constructing and deconstructing were all designated with the DNA from the Bad Batch. Within a week, Tarkin would show up at the facility and he would have Nala Se executed, along with the rest of her Kaminoan scientific squad. Shortly after that, Omega would be put through tests, though sadly, considering her age and the lack of accelerated growth, she would die painfully in the same experiments that her brothers had to endure. On the other hand, the Bad Batch would arrive at the flagship of their new boss. The ship was still a Venator, but it had its paint completely stripped, and it sat idle over the planet of Coruscant. The Bad Batch didn't know anything, other than they were to report to the vessel, receive their new armor, and then serve the orders that they were given. As troopers of the Empire, it was their responsibility to follow their leader. When they arrived, they were outfitted with all-black Phase 2 clone trooper armor in the same style that they wore as clones. It was a little individualized, but no longer did they have the extra colors or the little decals spastically placed across the armor. After the Bad Batch replaced their armor, they reported to the bridge of the flagship. The captain on deck informed them that their leader would be momentarily here. He would be informing them of their next mission once he arrived. The Bad Batch stood on the bridge at attention, awaiting the arrival of who would become their new boss. And then the floor began to rumble. The sound of heavy breathing echoed, and a large shadow began to pounce up the walls of the bridge as Lord Vader entered. He paid no attention to those around him as he walked over towards the Bad Batch. Vader stopped and looked at the clones that served him at the very end of the Clone Wars. Inside of one of the helmets was Echo, and he served with the 501st before it became known as Vader's Fist, led by none other than Commander Appo. Regardless, Vader informed the Bad Batch that per request of the Emperor himself, they were to accompany him on every mission. The Bad Batch was being assigned to Vader 24/7. This directive wasn't something that Vader actually wanted. Instead, it was very embarrassing for him. The Emperor did it because Vader almost got killed by a Jedi a week before. While Vader was very new to the suit, he had been killing Jedi left and right for a good couple months until he was unlucky enough to find himself in the presence of a Jedi Master's niece. Keldors were naturally strong, but Sha Kun was related to the great Jedi Master Plo Koon. She fought Darth Vader and beat him, nearly killing him to death. Though the only reason she didn't kill Vader was because he was unarmed. Sha Kun had the opportunity to rid the universe of one of the worst individuals the galaxy had ever seen, and she didn't kill him because it wasn't the Jedi way. In some aspects, one couldn't blame her, but at the same time her uncle would have done what needed to be done in the moment. So because Vader almost died to a mere Jedi Knight, who so happened to be related to Plo Koon, Cease decided that Vader was no longer safe enough to hunt Jedi alone, so he assigned the Bad Batch to him, considering they proved their loyalty. Even more, it was a test of their skills, and a way to make Vader feel insignificant. If the Bad Batch showed to be effective with Lord Vader, then a mass production of their clones would be of great use to the Empire. Immediately, the Bad Batch would get their first chance at action since the war ended. They would be dispatched with Lord Vader and sent to a small moon in the Outer Rim to deal with a group of Jedi. Vader wasn't fond of having the Bad Batch work with him. It felt more than anything like it was hindering him. Regardless, he accepted that they were a part of his squad, and as the shuttle left the Venator, they flew down to the surface. When they landed, the Bad Batch members ran out of the shuttle with their weapons raised. Vader, resenting the Bad Batch, told them to set up a perimeter and await his command. They acknowledged the order and set themselves up around the facility, Crosshair taking higher ground, Hunter finding his way through the vents, and Echo, Wrecker, and Tech looking for the long way around the facility to box the Jedi in. Vader walked up to the door panel and slammed it open with the Force and walked in. Crosshair reported to Vader that there were 4 younglings and 2 Jedi Masters. In accordance with their briefing, there should have been more Jedi than were present. Crosshair looked around and then reported to Wrecker that there were 2 Jedi sneaking up behind him and the other 2. Crosshair readied his sniper and locked in on the 2 Jedi sneaking up behind his squad mates, and he pulled the trigger. One of the Jedi dropped to the ground immediately, and the other ignited their lightsaber. Tech and Echo jumped out of the way, but Wrecker ran up and grabbed the hand of the Jedi, twisting it back, using his brute strength to break the Jedi's wrist. Wrecker brought around his fist and clocked the Jedi in the face, dropping him to the ground, as Wrecker ripped out his blaster and shot several rounds into the Jedi. Inside the facility, the Jedi all ignited their weapons, walking around protecting the younglings, too young to even defend themselves. Hunter got in and took a good sight of the group as Vader walked in, amused by the Jedi's presence. He stood there silently and waited for their first move. The Jedi Masters ran towards him, and without igniting his lightsaber, he used the Force to throw one of them from their feet, as he used the Force to push the other's blade away from him. The Jedi younglings saw this and began to run away. Hunter saw this and jumped down from out of the vent and ran over to the children, not old enough to even have their own weapons to defend themselves with. Echo, Tech, and Wrecker ran in and got a hold of the younglings and trapped all of them. Crosshair from up above kept a good readout of everything to make sure that there were no traps that were going to be sprung. Vader then ignited his lightsaber as he swung it around violently, crushing across the back of one of the Jedi Masters. Vader turned around and reached out his arm and lifted the final Jedi up with the Force. Vader sheathed his lightsaber and used the Force to bring the Jedi's own weapon back at him. It was excruciating for the Jedi, but pleasure for Vader, as he made the Jedi use his own weapon to kill himself. Once the Jedi were defeated, Vader turned to the Bad Batch, who had gathered up the younglings and waited for his order. Vader genuinely appreciated the simple act. It allowed him to kill the younglings, and his squad had his back if he needed them. In a way, his own punishment became his own reward, and because the Bad Batch had their inhibitor chips heightened, they were more than ready to carry out any order given to them, though Vader wanted to deal with the younglings himself. For any other clone, it would have been haunting, hearing the crying and pleading from the younglings as they looked death in the eyes, and were killed one by one, having to watch each of their friends die before their very eyes. But not for the Bad Batch. It only encouraged them to want to serve Lord Vader more. As the years began to pass by, the Bad Batch would get more familiar with the game of hunting and killing Jedi. They became really good at it. The Emperor noticed that the Bad Batch was better at hunting Jedi than the Inquisitorius themselves. While yes, some of the Inquisitors were good, one of them was recently killed on a moon by a Jedi that was exposed by civilians. The Inquisitor had killed everyone and burnt the city to the ground, only to be killed by his own lightsaber. The Empire didn't know it was Ahsoka Tano that did it, but it was. The Emperor was pulling Vader away from hunting Jedi because he noticed that Vader was obsessing over the hunt. He no longer cared for anything else, and so Sidious forced him away from his squad and made the Bad Batch take up hunting Jedi, that the Inquisitorius failed to kill. On one of their missions, the Bad Batch would return to Fortress Inquisitorius, and they would kill the Jedi Cal Kestis and his friend Cere Junda, while they tried to escape Darth Vader. Another show of their excellence. In the same year, the Bad Batch would be on Mapuzo, and they would assist in the capture of Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, while the third sister, Reva, was able to capture the Senator of Alderaan's daughter in Leia Organa. This would cause an uproar amongst the ranks of the Imperials at Fortress Inquisitorius. An Inquisitor capturing a Senator's daughter was an issue. While Vader wasn't originally interested in Leia, due to his seething hatred for Kenobi, once he finished torturing Obi-Wan, which led to a very painful death for the Jedi Master, he would come to find that Leia Organa was connected to the Force. He would award Reva for her work in capturing a Force-sensitive child, though Reva's pain would only just begin, because Vader got what he wanted from her, and the Grand Inquisitor was brought back from the dead to take his place back as the role of Grand Inquisitor. In a duel between the Grand Inquisitor and the third sister, the Grand Inquisitor would kill Reva in front of Leia and Vader's eyes. Though unfortunately for Leia, Vader didn't sense the connection between the two of them. Leia would be sent to Wayland to the Mount Tantus facility, and she would be picked apart like a science experiment for the Emperor. Truly a tragic tale for the family of Skywalker. On the other hand, Bail would try and take care of the boy, but Owen and Beru weren't going to allow that. Luke would remain trapped on Tatooine with his aunt and uncle, and never have the distinct pleasure of meeting Obi-Wan Kenobi. Bail and Breya would be heartbroken that their daughter had disappeared, and Bail would be incredibly saddened for the loss of his friend. The friend he forced out into the galaxy to be ripped apart by Vader himself. Obi-Wan's excruciating death would be felt by Jedi across the galaxy, one of the final hopes in the galaxy itself being extinguished. The chance for Luke to be a saving grace in the galaxy began to depreciate, and he no longer seemed like a viable option. Regardless, there were less and less Jedi in the galaxy, and the Bad Batch was beginning to do operations against small rebel insurgencies. While the Bad Batch themselves were aging, their replacements were coming off the cloning lines at Mount Tantus, and several iterations of Experimental Unit 99 were being rolled out across the galaxy. The Bad Batch was the final elite squad of clones still functioning in the Empire, until their replacements were rolled out. And instead of a very luxurious life that Imperial officers got to endure, the Bad Batch was brought back to Mount Tantus, where they were consumed for part of the Dark Trooper project. Their old bodies would be filled inside of the interiors of the robots, and the torture had just begun, all in servitude to the Empire. With thousands of elite Bad Batch squads roaming the galaxy, Jedi would be slaughtered, and the last little bit of light in the galaxy would be extinguished. Luke Skywalker would eventually join the Imperial Academy. Having been a farmer on a planet like Tatooine with a father who had no real disdain for the Empire, he would serve his time, until discovered by the Emperor. Sidious would bring Luke to Coruscant, where he would begin training with a redhead girl a couple years younger than him, named Mara Jade, all in the secrecy of his father. Grand Admiral Thrawn would also ensure the defeat of the rebels at Lothal. Every time a small band of rebels popped up, they were squashed. This too happened at Ferrix, the home world of Cassian Andor. The rebels stood no chance, and their hope vanished out from under them, as Lord Vader would be replaced by a much stronger duo of Sith, being Mara Jade and his very own son, Luke Skywalker. Luke would never connect the dots to Vader being his father, but once Vader was replaced, the Emperor ensured himself longevity as ruler of the galaxy. With the cloning program going so well, Sidious would do an essence transfer where he would move his body and entire spirit into a much younger and stronger body. This body would resemble him at the younger years, and thanks to the lasting legacy of the Bad Batch, the Empire would continue to succeed. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks Benjamin Wells, Jonathan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Darth, Cheesy, Apollo, Madman Studios, Anakin003, Lemon Knight, and Flynn Van Cease for supporting the channel. Hit 2,000 likes on this video so we can see what comes next. If you want to see What If, let me know down below. I read all of your comments, but I don't do crossovers. Check out the Twitch, community Discord, and Patreon if you want to support me in other ways. Otherwise, thank you for all of your patience. I am moving, so I have got 3 videos prepared for you guys this weekend. I don't know what order they're in, but they are prepared for you as I'm getting ready to move, so thank you for your continuous support. Otherwise, if you want merch, go down below. The merch store is available. I got all these designs and the limited time Pride of the Empire shirt, which is out during Season 1 of the Earth series, and the Broken One shirt. Otherwise, let's talk about our story. So, The Bad Batch has another dark ending. Who saw that coming? I'm sure you didn't. I'm sure you didn't see this coming. But with a title like this, I kind of wanted to have fun with it. I thought having the Bad Batch kind of like fill the role of an elite squad would be really fun, and it honestly was a lot of fun. I enjoyed doing it a lot because I got to do something with the Bad Batch that I didn't really do before, and I got to have them kind of fill the role as Vader's elite squad. Now, like, it's kind of fun with the butterfly effect, and I know I didn't really do that in the last Bad Batch episode, and I know I got flack for it, but honestly, I thought it was a lot of fun kind of having them all killed off by Vader. Spoiler, in the last Bad Batch video that I did. But in this one, it was fun to kind of have them do the reverse. So they were tortured by the Empire, and I kind of see this being the way that it would go. If they'd actually followed the orders of the Empire, they kind of would have been all thrown to Mount Tantiss. Now, Mount Tantiss, if you guys aren't aware, is something from Legends. It's from the Thrawn series, the 3-book series that came out based around Thrawn, which has just reappeared during the Bad Batch, the final season of the Bad Batch, and that is a planet on Wayland. So, Legends is being, brought back to canon, which is cool. And I wanted to use that. I thought that'd be an interesting, integral part. Now, the tragedy, travesty, whatever you want to call it, of the story is what happens to Omega. I mean, that is really sad, and I do feel bad about doing that, but, I can't play favorites, and I think the truth is, I think Omega would eventually be found out. I don't know how fast that would happen, but I know she would eventually be found out. Nala Se would be, executed for being a traitor, and it just overall wouldn't be too great for anyone that defied the Empire in this scenario. I think the Bad Batch is good enough as a squad to actually hunt Jedi, and I think that the Empire would employ them to hunt Jedi, and the Inquisitorius would be kind of faded out. I think that Inquisitorius doesn't do a good job at killing Jedi, other than like younglings and Padawans, because if they fight a knight or a master, they're kind of dead. And I felt like using the legend battle between Shaq Kun and Darth Vader would be a great tie-in. Otherwise, I kind of filled in a hole that people didn't like in the Kenobi show, which was Vader letting Kenobi go. If the Bad Batch was there, I don't think they would have let Kenobi go. And to that extent, while we're talking about it, I think Vader let Kenobi go because he knew he was going to have a chance to fight Obi-Wan at his full strength again, and I think that's the only reason that he let him go is because he's like, I want to fight him at his full strength, I don't want to just win here. If the Bad Batch was there, I don't think they'd really care. I think they would just do what their mission was, which was capture the Jedi, and that was their overarching mission over Vader's mission and orders, because they came from the Emperor. Otherwise, I can't think of anything else I really want to talk about regarding the story. I had a lot of fun. I know it's a darker story, a darker tone, but we do have other stories coming out, and they don't all have that same brooding, yeah, it's not, I don't think the rest of them are that dark. But anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.